What is up, good people of the internet? This video is a breakdown of the process that I used to mix 614 Church's new album, which is called Looking at Love. Now, there is a little bit that goes into the mixing process that's not just the act of mixing in a DAW. So if you're just here for the sweet mix tricks, you can skip to this timestamp right here, or you can hang out with me for a few minutes and I'm going to walk through the pre-production phase. Totally up to you. During the pre-production phase, we did separate band and vocal rehearsals. I found sometimes at rehearsals, vocalists are standing around while the band is trying to create parts or discussing arrangements. We recorded every rehearsal that we did with the band, and then I bounced some practice tracks so that the band could hear and adjust the parts. These didn't have vocals on them, but it was still helpful to hear back. Sometimes you have an idea in your head, and then you hear it back and you realize that it doesn't exactly sound the same. We also use this to build a starting template and get a high-level overview of kind of the tones and overall frequency balance that we were going for. By tracking all the rehearsals, we ended up with several multi-tracks at the tempo of each song with roughly the same tones. This was such a help in the editing phase. There were a couple times where an instrument hit a wrong note for the recording during the actual recording night, and we were able to easily splice a rehearsal take in since we recorded all of our rehearsals to a click. For this project, my main goal was to maximize vocal intelligibility. I wanted the listener to be able to clearly understand every lyric of every single song. For this project, I used roughly 90% stock plugins. Now, I have nothing against third-party plugins. I've spent a lot of money on them, but I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to show that you can get good results without spending a lot of money on those third-party plugins. A lot of the secret sauce on this project really did come from the editing phase. It's very labor-intensive and very time-consuming, but it's honestly so worth it. Fortunately, I had to do almost no time alignment on this project. The band was very, very tight, and Stu, the drummer, is basically a human metronome. I did go through for the vocals, and I did a decent amount of manual clip gain. And by clip gain, I mean that I split the individual regions, and I would gain it up or down as I saw fit. I bounced this entire section, so that's why you don't see it here. Instead of pushing up the fader, this pushes up the actual input stage. Now this does hit the dynamics processing differently, so that's just something to keep in mind. I also went through and melodined all of the vocals. You won't see it on this because I bounced the track with the Melodyne on it. I also manually stripped silence for all of these tracks. Even when instruments aren't playing or vocals aren't singing, mics are still picking up signal, and instruments can still transmit hum, buzz, or fret noise. So I played guitar on this album. What if I'm not playing for a verse, but I forgot to roll off my volume pedal and my fingers slide up the frets? That's going to create some noise that I don't necessarily want in the track. This isn't something that I would do for every project. For studio songs, sometimes it's actually good to leave the noise floor in. Otherwise, it can sound really sterile. However, for this project, we knew we were going to have room mics set up, so that's what's giving us our bed of ambient noise by default. I also went through for a few of the songs on the album, and I manually gated all of the toms. This can make it sound a little bit weird, and it does take a very long time. It's not always objectively better, but it does make it tighter for certain sections of certain songs. It's more of an artistic decision. I also went through every track and I used iZotope D-Click. For some reason, we were getting clicks throughout every channel. So I manually went through every one of the multi-tracks and ran D-Click on them. I could have just run it on the master, but I didn't want to risk D-Click accidentally destroying the transient detail on the tracks. Let's take a look at our drums. Now, there were no triggers or drum samples across this entire album. I have nothing against triggers personally. I just wanted to challenge myself. The most important thing with drums is mic placement. For instance, on the snare for this album, we placed our SM57 almost parallel to the head, as close to the head as possible, pointed towards the center of the snare. and it was mounted on a separate mic stand, so it wasn't clipped to the actual shell. Since the mic is closer to the head, it's going to pick up a little bit more low end, but you do sacrifice a little bit of isolation. A lot of the punch from the drums is coming from a parallel compression bus that I applied to the kick, the snare, and the rack and floor. By itself, that sounds like this. I used a Dynacomp guitar style compressor for this because it has a super fast attack, and that's what gives it the punch. And I'm running it in parallel. That's why I have it on a bus, so that I don't lose the transient detail of the shells. On my drum bus, I do have an SSL style compressor that's doing a fairly decent amount of work. Now, this is not necessarily my personal preference, but it's a fit for the genre. The genre tends to have these very bus compressed drums with an SSL style compressor. This genre also tends to favor very high passed overheads. You can see on my overheads, I'm getting rid of anything that's below almost 1K. Now, I make a lot of Americana music, and that genre gets most of the tone from the overheads. It's not really a better or worse thing, just a different style. Let's take a look at the bass. It had a lot of mid-range, and so I did end up cutting a decent bit of low mids and a little bit of high mids in order to get the guitars a little bit bigger, because they were fighting each other a little bit frequency-wise. Here's it without the EQ. Here's it with the EQ. I did also use low control to get more sub out of the bass. Here's without it. Then here's with it. I'm also using Logic's stock Chroma Glow plugin to get a little bit more drive out of it. Let's take a look at the band. One thing that I've noticed with a lot of worship tracks is the stereo image of the guitars. To my ears, it sounds like the guitars are stereo panned pretty hard left and right. So I tried it on this track, and it sounds a little bit like this. One challenge with guitars is getting them loud without them covering up the vocals. Guitar tracks can tend to have a decent amount of high mid-range, and as a guitar player myself, I have a tendency to do this because more high mids generates more perceived loudness. I found that by cutting some high mids, a lot of times around that 2K range, you can get the guitars quote unquote louder without them actually sounding as loud, since they're not interfering with the vocals. Again, this is pretty dependent on genre. If you're making shoegaze or dream pop music, the opposite might actually be true. Just something to try. Generally, I like to get more low mids from the keys and not rely as much on the guitars for body. Hence, you can see why I boosted some low mids in the keys, and they sound kind of like this. Crowd mics. Crowd mics are what really make it a live album. We placed a few stereo pairs of crowd mics in different places around our room. Now with crowd mics, you definitely lose some clarity, but I think it's worth the trade-off for the amount of emotion and feeling that you get with them. I definitely gained these crowd mics around quite a bit. So this is my automation. This is how loud and how quiet it's getting per section of the song. I wanted them loud for certain sections, and I wanted them a little bit quieter for other sections. Let's take a listen to this part. I try not to shove crowd mics into a pre-established mixing template. Instead, I prefer to sacrifice instruments for the crowd mics. I'm willing to let the instruments sound a little bit thinner if it means that I can get more body out of those crowd mics. The reason for this is I feel like crowd mics are such an emotional source, and I really want to get them as loud as I can. Finally, let's take a look at the vocals. The most important thing with vocals is always the actual vocal performance itself. Fabian did an absolutely beautiful job singing this song. Second to that is great mic technique, which he also did a good job of utilizing for this song. Signal to noise ratio is absolutely key with vocals. Have you ever been at a wedding where someone goes to give their speech, but they hold the mic down by their stomach? No matter how loud they talk, the mic is not getting an optimal amount of signal to produce the desired output. This genre uses a lot more compression than I would generally run on vocals. The general vibe is to squash the vocals on the front end and then automate dynamics on the back end if needed. The reasoning behind this is vocal intelligibility over top of a big wall of sound that a lot of vocal tracks tend to have, and the emotion tends to come less from the vocal dynamics and more from the vocal tone/delivery and the lyrics. In the studio, I would try a parallel compressor on vocals for this. But live, a parallel compressor can easily turn into parallel noise due to bleed. Something I found that works well on vocals is stacking a bunch of subtle spatial effects. Spatial effects just means reverbs and delays. That's what makes it sound like you're singing in a room and not right next to somebody's ear. I'm going to mute all of our spatial effects, which I almost always run on bus sends here, meaning that they're in parallel. So I retain the full dry signal from the original vocal. Here's it without anything.
Christ glorified, seated on high.
First, I have a short room reverb.
Christ glorified.
It already sounds like he's singing inside of a room instead of singing right next to your ear. Next, I have a short vocal delay. This one's very subtle.
Christ glorified.
Next, I have a long reverb. This one is very subtle as well. It's turned down quite a bit in the mix. It's more of a feel it as opposed to hear it thing.
Christ glorified.
And finally, I have a long vocal delay. Again, this is barely on.
Christ glorified, seated on high. Glory to glory, we adore you. And with unveiled face, in your embrace, glory to glory.
There's a little bit of how I mixed Looking at Love by 614 Worship. This entire album and process of making it was such a joy and a blessing to be a part of. I'm so thankful. I hope this inspires you. Mixing is just like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get. I promise. If this inspires you to do some mixes of your own, please send them to me. I would love to hear them. That's all for now. See ya.